Monday morning, April 15th edition of Birds 365, year number 4. Joe Kraus again in the chair today, along with John McMullen. Great lineup all week this week, Johnny Mac, for the anticipation of the draft coming up beginning a week from this Thursday. No, the Philadelphia Eagles will not select Caitlin Clark. They may go Iowa. When they get to their pick in the opening round, should they stay at 22? But a good morning to you, sir.
Morning. Yeah, they could use probably Caitlin Clark. Greatness is greatness, but maybe Iowa's on. Who knows? We know that's tight end. We know you get a lot of good offensive linemen from Iowa over the years, but April 15th. It's not exactly Christmas, but Eagles can report today for off-season work. So phase 1, it all begins today. 2 weeks, meeting, strength and conditioning, rehab, things like that. You can't do any on-field work, but guys are back in the building this morning.
And let's begin Birds 365 with some breaking news here today, Johnny Mac, on Birds 365. I will not be the replacement co-host for Birds 365 in year 4. I just want to put it out there. Make sure that we keep everyone at Crossing Broad in the loop, and I will not be the co-host going forward. But we will have an announcement coming shortly. But until then, we'll bring you the best that we can bring, which will be good, Johnny Mac, as we get ready for the draft.
Yeah, it's always an exciting time of year. I argue, the NFL draft might be even bigger than the Super Bowl from the perspective that every team is involved and every fan base is involved and every fan base gets excited, and there's so much optimism this time of year. And that's what the bad teams forget about, the teams that are both supposed to be contenders like the Philadelphia Eagles, and we'll see how it all shakes out. But I think Howie's done this typical good job of sort of draft proofing the roster. You shouldn't be forced to reach for a particular position. And I think there's this give and take, and I get this constantly about the Eagles got to do this. The Eagles got to be all in. And I was talking about that with Jody a little bit a few weeks ago. I don't know what that means. I mean, there's not a team in the NFL that goes all in at every position. You can't have an all-star at every position. You have to have role players. And the minute you start drafting for immediacy and you say, well, this guy might not be ready right away, but he's got a tremendous upside, but this guy might be a little bit more day one ready, but his ceiling is not nearly as high, you start making mistakes. So Howie does a good job of draft proofing the roster each and every year. And there's some obvious needs, not to that point, but you want to have at least a contingency at each position. And he's managed to accomplish that so far in the offseason, via the trade market, whether you talk about a backup quarterback like Kenny Pickett or free agency, which ranges from, guys that have to be impactful, Saquon Barkley, Bryce Huff, CJ Gardner-Johnson, to those one-year flyers who are very important, because if you go back to the 27 Super Bowl season, I don't think anybody was sitting there saying, oh, Patrick Robinson, Chris Long, one-year deal, LeGarrette Blount, one-year deal in May or whatever it was. That's exciting. No, but they proved to be very valuable contributors. And when you hit on some of those one-year lottery tickets, occasionally, special things can happen. So whether you're talking about Devin White or Paris Campbell, or even Avonte Maddox coming back, CJ Uzomah most recently as a backup tight end, when you start hitting on those one-year players, special things can happen.
I don't know, and I'm not familiar with your entire body of work, John, and your entire history of covering the Birds and also covering this league. So I don't know whether or not you like doing mock drafts, or
Oh, I
whether
hate it.
yeah.
I hate it. Um, it's an exercise in futility. I mean, and there's educated guesses and there's more education than outlier. But one of the things as you get closer to the draft, at least you have a clearer picture. Like they're so silly prior to free agency because if you start prior, we just talked about some of the guys. Well, you maybe needed a running back pretty early. Well, now you have Saquon Barkley. How does that work out for your mock draft? Um, the safety position was an obvious need, and all of a sudden, C.J. Gardner-Johnson is back. So, and even edge rusher with Bryce Huff, even though you trade Hassan Reddick, you're not paying a guy $17 million a year to sit on the bench. That's not how it works in this league. So, yeah, I get it. People like him, but understand what they are and how he says all the time. He doesn't talk to anybody about the Philadelphia Eagles pre-draft. Occasionally, he'll let us in on some thought processes after the draft. So when you hear, "Oh, source says how," or blah blah blah, or you know, take it with a grain of salt. I'll just put it like that.
NFL draft coverage all week here on Birds 365. Today at 8:20, John welcomes in our good buddy Jeff Kerr for conversation with Jeff. And then at 9:20, which will be hour number 2 of Birds 365, Devin Jackson from the Philadelphia Inquirer covers the draft for the Inquirer. So more draft coverage coming up in hour number 2 as well. John, I'm not asking you to do a mock draft, but just from the ability or from the thought process of identifying what you think the Eagles are focused on. Is it in this order? Cornerback, edge rusher, offensive lineman, game changer? Or is it offensive lineman, linebacker, game changer?
Well, they, from the Eagles' perspective, it's none of the above, because they don't know what the 21 picks before them are going to be. They have educated guesses, as like I said, but there's a lot of teams that are going to go in different directions. So, I just wrote about this on SI and the fact that, you have generally a cloud of prospects when you pick. There's one team in the NFL, the Chicago Bears, who can go to sleep at night and rest assured that they're going to get the player they want because they have the number 1 overall pick. And then, it starts to go incrementally down. Number 2 is Washington, and they have a good feel because they know Chicago's going to take Caleb Williams. So they can feel comfortable and say, and then as you keep dropping and dropping, there's less certainty. And that the Eagles start at 22. So there's a lot of uncertainty. Now, over the years, we've gotten information. I've gotten information, and with certain Eagles picks or potential picks and things like that. 2017, I talk about a lot. They would have liked to draft Christian McCaffrey, which I think would have blown people's minds because they would have took a running back relatively early in the draft at number 14. He ended up going number 8. So they never even got close to it. In more recent years, when you look at, targeted trade ups for Jordan Davis and Devontae Smith, Jordan Davis, they started at 15. They knew Baltimore was going to take him at 14, so they had to jump over them to get him at 13. And then Devontae Smith is probably the most interesting year because the Eagles went down in that draft from 6 to 12 to get an extra pick, and then went back up because they had a cloud of 4 players that they hoped would have fell to number 12. Jalen Waddle, who went number 6, ironically, the Eagles' original pick. J.C. Horn, Patrick Surtain, who won 8 and 9. And then they saw the New York Giants at number 11, and they kind of knew the Giants were going to take Devontae Smith. That was the last player they wanted at 12. If they weren't able to trade up with Dallas, it was interesting because it was NFC East, NFC East, NFC East. Dallas wanted Micah Parsons. They knew, their one demand of the Eagles was offense, defense when they're making the trade. Are you taking an offensive player or you're taking a defensive player? The Eagles said offense. They felt comfortable. The Giants needed a receiver as well. They weren't going to go defense, so they could drop down and get Micah Parsons. It worked out well for them. They got extra draft capital. Eagles jumped over the Giants. They were able to get Devontae Smith. So these are some of the things. As you go down to 22, the Eagles are probably going to have a cloud of 4 or 5 guys that they would feel comfortable with at that position. Most of them are probably going to be gone.
That's what I was saying. That was going to be my follow-up question to you. So, a player that you like, that I guess many people like, the cornerback Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo, he's gone. He'll be off the board. So he's not a guy that the Eagles are going to use draft capital to come up the ladder in the draft.
Well, you never know. That's the thing. If they like a particular player, and they've done it 3 years recently, and Jordan Davis, I mentioned DeMonte Smith, Jalen Carter, even last year they moved up very slightly, but they wanted to make sure they got Jalen Carter. So they've done it in recent years a lot. And if somebody they really like starts falling near 22, they will jump up and try to get him. This could be the year you want to go down, in my estimation, because there's a lot of offensive tackles available, and they'll get good value because that's the odds game. There's so many good offensive tackles in the first round of the draft that should get value even at 22. But the Eagles don't need a tackle right now because Lane Johnson's still playing at an all-pro level. Jordan Mailata is playing at an all-pro level, just got a $66 million extension. So the thought process would be, well, you start him out at right guard, then you kick him out to right tackle whenever Lane says it's time to retire. And that's fine and dandy, but I don't think a lot of them, or at least the 2 players I think the Eagles like, would be Amarius Mims and Tyler Guyton. Amarius from Georgia, the Georgia connection, but very good athlete, tremendous ceiling as a player, very Eagles-y pick, tremendous upside. And then Tyler Guyton has the history with Lane Johnson. I think they would be very comfortable. But I don't think either of those players project all that well inside to guard. So it's sort of no man's land, 22. The 2 corners I think they'd be interested in are Mitchell, as you mentioned, and Terrion Arnold from Alabama. I don't think either of them will be anywhere near 22. But we'll see. There's
would that be a decision, John? I didn't mean to cut you off there, but would that be a decision? Use those 2 players as the reference. Would that be a decision that Howie should make to move up, to trade, to get? Is that position on the 24 roster so important and so necessary for the success of the franchise in 24? Would it merit that movement?
I don't think so. And I might be the only person left in Philadelphia that would be interested to see if James Bradberry could have a bounce back year with Vic Fangio, because I think Vic is smart enough. He's been doing this long enough that he's going to put James Bradberry in the right positions to take advantage of what he does well. And he's a pure zone corner. The Eagles moved him around a lot last year, played him in the slot, played him on the other side when Slay was banged up. I thought that was a mistake for that particular player. And I think he had a bad season and people are really, really down on him. I think the odds are that insert name, whichever cornerback you like in the first round of the draft, comes in day one starter and plays at the level of James Bradbury in this complicated of a defensive scheme is sort of pie in the sky. So I think whomever, even if you're able to get Terrion Arnold or Quinyon Mitchell, and I think there's going to be a lot of growing pains with young corners. You kind of saw that last year, lesser degree. Obviously, these guys would be more talented. So it's certainly to a lesser degree, but it's a very complicated defense for young players. And I would be very cautious of wishing for that. And then when the second tier of corners, I don't think belong at 22. I think those would be trade down candidates. I know a lot of people are excited about Cooper DeJean from Iowa. We mentioned Iowa. And, you know, I don't think the value, I think the Eagles are very big, matching evaluation of players with valuation of draft spots. I think they could get him a little bit later. Same thing with Wiggins from Clemson and any other cornerback, Rackestraw from Missouri. Any of those guys, I think you can fall back. And if I'm trading back, the guy I want is Graham Barton from Duke, who's a natural interior offensive lineman. And he would be, to me, a day one starter at right guard. And then you have somebody valuable, really valuable, immediately.
Coming up right on the other side of the break, Jeff Kerr is going to jump in, and I'll turn everything over to John McMullen and Jeff Kerr, and they'll get a little bit deeper into the draft. Last thing then, John, just finish this before I exit out of here and turn things over to you and Jeff. Priority right now for the Eagles: interior lineman, offensive lineman, cornerback, game changer.
Who's the best player left? That's
Right.
what Howie will tell you. And it doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. And that's why he's, better than most GMs. But there's not as many bad GMs as there have been in this league. They're getting smarter, understanding. I always use the cliche Brian Billick gave me. Need is the worst talent evaluator in sports. So if you're drafting because you think you have a need, you're not going to be good. And the Eagles will take the best player. And if that means an offensive tackle, they will take an offensive tackle. And they will say to the fan base, it will be up in arms because it's not sexy. They will say, look, this is how we do this. That's what Howie said a couple of years ago when he drafted Cam Jurgens, and everybody was upset. This is how we roll. This is how we do it. This is how we build this thing. And that will continue.
Birds 365 on a Monday, April 15th. We roll into our first commercial break. Jeff Kerr on the other side of the break. Quick reminder for the audience today. Del Val Insurance is out there. Your number one draft pick for car insurance. Save up to 40% on Del Val. They have 15 to 20 different insurance companies that they can use, and they can match what you need with the price you want to pay. Call Del Val Insurance at 215-354-0122. Back in a moment.
Hi, I'm Jim Muehlbronner, Managing Partner at Del Val Insurance Group. Give us a call. We're a local, knowledgeable agency, not an 800 number. Go Birds!